Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our last webinar on the interRAI assessment tool, at least the last one of this series, where we've done kind of a deep dive into the individual sections. So real quick, this is Debbie Pearson, and I'm Deputy Director of the Division of Aging, and I'm going to turn you over here shortly to Amy Rapp to do this training along with Roxanne Brooks from the Relias Learning company that's helping us with this. But I just really quickly wanted to thank you all for participating in not just this webinar, but the others that we have been doing. And I also want to let you know that, these aren't the end of the webinars. We're going to get some other stuff scheduled. There's going to be trainings that will continue after July 1st. Once you all have started getting comfortable with the tool and using it in the field, we're going to continue training and reinforcing the core principles of person-centered planning and needs-based assessment, along with the particulars of how to use this tool and make interpretations of each of these items. So this is just the beginning of a long training and education process that will last for several months. So we ask your patience as we go through that. You're going to get plenty of opportunities to learn and ask questions and kind of evolve with us as we go through this. This assessment tool is part of a larger shift to an emphasis on that person-centeredness and needs-based assessment, less focus on eligibility-driven conversations and activities. Eligibility is and always will be an important part of what we do. It's when you have funding, you have eligibility considerations. But we want to be sure that for you folks that are out there on the front line dealing with our service participants, that you're focused on their needs, their strengths, their preferences, and doing true and accurate assessments of what their needs are, and being person-centered about that in every way possible. And so our switch to this tool is part of our ongoing efforts to create a system in which you can be as person-centered as we know you all want to be. So I just wanted to kind of hit on that, and then I'll talk a little bit more about our future plans at the end of the session today. But I will turn it over to Amy.
Good morning, everyone. Today we will be, as you can see on the screen, we're going to be reviewing sections, the final sections of L through T. And here's the different sections. I will not read these to you, but these are the sections with their headings of what we're going to be reviewing today. So we do have Roxanne Brooks on the line, and she is with Relias, and she has been offering a lot of technical support and education on the interRAI for us. And so I'm going to turn this over to her so we can get started on section L on skin condition.
Great. Thank you, Amy, and thanks again for everyone joining us today. I'm excited to get started, so how about we just dive in? We have section L up on the screen here, and this is skin condition. And for this section, what we're trying to determine is the condition of the person's skin, help identify presence and stages of ulcers, and document skin conditions and note any kind of foot problems that may be present. So that's pretty much for this section here. L1, it looks at the most severe pressure ulcer, and the definition of that is any lesion that is caused by unrelieved pressure. And this most commonly occurs over bony areas, and the ulcers are staged to classify the degree of tissue damage that the person would have. The presence of these ulcers can speak to lack of mobility. A lot of people get pressure ulcers if they have poor bed mobility or they're not consistent with their bed mobility, and it leads us to ask the question, do they need help in this area? If the person has an ulcer, it would probably be best to obtain this information from a care provider. Now, usually, if they have one, someone's probably taken care of it. You should never feel the need or the pressure to stage this yourself. Even if your client wants to show you the ulcer, which they probably will, it's really not your responsibility. Find someone who's taking care of it and then gather the information in that way. Number 2 looks at prior pressure ulcers, so you just want to know if they've had one before, because if they have, then they're at risk of having another ulcer, so that's a very important piece to capture. L3 looks at presence of skin ulcer other than a pressure ulcer, and some examples would be a venous ulcer, arterial ulcer, or a diabetic foot ulcer, and again, consult medical records or care provider for accuracy in capturing this. L4 looks at major skin problems, and this would be 2nd or 3rd degree burns and healing surgical wounds. That's what you would capture in that there. L5 looks at skin cuts or tears, and these are more superficial. They wouldn't include any kind of surgical incisions. It'd be quite a long list, so any superficial kind of skin conditions there. L6 looks at other skin conditions or changes in skin conditions. That could be bruises or rashes, itching, eczema, those types of things you would capture there. And the last one is foot problems. It can contribute to poor mobility or issues with walking and locomotion, and these would include things like bunions, structural problems, infections, and ulcers on the foot. I can see from the comments that there's some issues with sound. Should I continue to go ahead?
Yeah, are you, Roxanne, are you on a speakerphone or are you on a handheld?
I'm on a speaker VoIP phone.
Okay, do you have the option of a handheld?
I can just take it off the hook and hold in my hand.
Okay, I think we'll get a little better sound that way, if you would, please.
How does this sound?
Oh, much, much better, thank you.
Okay, so hopefully this will solve the problem. I want to make sure everybody is able to hear me, and then we'll move forward. Okay, we're now on section M, medication, and this one captures quite a few things: the name and the dose, amount of the medication, how it's administered, and the frequency, as well as it is PRN. So I always like this section because it's a good way to start your interview with your client, because it can give you information about their cognition. Do they know the name of their medications? Do they remember what to take? It can lead into so many different things that you need to capture in that assessment. So medication is always a good one, and most people feel very comfortable discussing medication. So this one looks at the name and the dose. And here we're looking at the units, so how much medication they're receiving, and also how that medication is getting into the person. And then the frequency, how often that they receive this medication. This slide here just looks at the listing of the medications. Depending on your software, you may have a drug library that you can access to populate that, or you can do it by hand, given the information that you've received from the client. Maybe different ways for you to capture that. This next section here, M2 and M3, this looks at an allergy to any drug, and this only includes drug allergies, not food allergies, so keep that in mind. And then M3 looks at adherence with medication prescribed by physician, and this one here is really just prescription drugs, so it does not include over-the-counter medications or any herbal or natural drugs, only prescribed medications by a physician, a nurse practitioner, or a physician assistant. So keep that in mind. Section N, this looks at treatments and procedures, and there's 5 sections here. There's 5 items that that you're going to be looking at in this section. And the first one here is N1. It looks at prevention, and this helps to determine if there are some unmet needs for health counseling and preventative care. There are different time frames for these questions, as you can see on the screen. Some are just within the last year, some are within 5, some are within 2 years. And all of these questions that you see here actually contribute to a cap, which you'll learn about later, and it contributes to the prevention cap. So it's important to capture this information. And 2 looks at treatments and programs received or scheduled within the last 3 days. And you see quite a list here of those different treatments, from chemotherapy, radiation, all the way down to wound care. So when you look at this question, you determine if your client is receiving any of these, and if they are, did they receive it? Was it ordered but not implemented? As you can see the coding above. So there's quite a few things that you're going to capture in this section. Section N2 looks at treatments and programs received or scheduled in the last 3 days. This one is for programs, and there are 3 that are highlighted here: the scheduled toileting program, palliative care, and turning or repositioning. Again, you would make sure that whether or not that was ordered and implemented, and if it was, how many times did they receive that particular program in the last 3 days. Formal care makes up section N3, and this captures the number of minutes spent by a formal caregiving agency in providing care or care management in the last 7 days. For this one, formal care can include direct services provided to the person, which would include both ADL and IADL support, management of care received, such as making medication schedules, planning future needs, and also the provision of therapeutic care by any formal agency or service provider. So when you can see the list here, home health aides and home nurse, homemaking services, meals, physical therapy, occupational, speech, and psychological therapies that your client could potentially be using. And when you're collecting this information, you're collecting the number of days. So if it's 1 day throughout the last 7 days or every single day, you capture that. And then you capture the accumulative minutes throughout those days. So if they've received the service 2 days a week for 30 minutes each day, it would be 60 minutes in total over those 3 days. This is how you do this. And this is a very important section because it does contribute to one of the outcomes from the interRAI HC, and that's the resource utilization groupings. I spoke about it briefly in one of the other webinars, and basically it determines how many resources are needed to provide care to that client. So this is a very important section.
Hi everyone, this is Amy. I'm going to interject on that last screen because there's one formal support that's missing, and Area 9 just chatted about this, is attendant care. And we did catch that on this level as well, and it's something that we need to work with interRAI about and trying to get that added on. But for right now, when this tool gets implemented, unfortunately, there's no way to capture the attendant care. So we are aware of it and we are working on it.
Last couple of sections here in treatments and programs are section N4, hospital use, emergency room use, or physician visits. So here they want to capture any inpatient acute hospital admissions with an overnight stay, an emergency room visit, or a physician visit. And the physician visit could be to a clinic or an appointment at the home, and that would include all types of medical personnel. Our last question here looks at physically restrained. Here, the person's limbs were restrained, the person was restrained to their chair when sitting, or the person was in a chair that prevented them from rising. And this is assessed regardless of the stated intent. So it may be done for that person's safety. However, even if it has been done, you would still capture it here in this system.
Okay, so this is Amy, and we have several slides now that's going to look at a high level of the level of care and how our current level of care kind of maps into the interRAI. And again, we can't reiterate this enough, but our level of care is going to remain the same. It's just a matter of what's different is just how it's captured, and that this tool is going to give us more accuracy and more consistency across the state. So to start off with decube ulcers, which is our skilled level of care, to meet that criteria, we mapped it over to L1 and N2K. For, again, the skilled level of care for the central venous or IV medications, we mapped that over to N2D with that score of 2 or 3. For skilled level of care of oxygen, with our current definition, we were able to map that over to N2E with the oxygen therapy with, so there's 3 options here, excuse me, for not getting myself composed on that one, but there's 3 options here. So either N2E, LR, which is pneumonia, or J3F, and with the J7B of if there's any kind of a flare-up that's an acute, with a score of yes, would be the qualification for the skilled level of care of oxygen. Then for an individual that just needs the intermediate level of care for oxygen, that would be N2E, with the episode of it occurring sometime within the last 3 days. Then for the skilled level of care for sectioning, that would go into N2G with the following scores as listed. For the skilled level of care for trach, again, N2H with the following scores of 2 or 3. For the skilled level of care for ventilator or a respirator, that goes into N2J, again, with a score of 2 or 3. Then for the intermediate level of care for repositioning, that's N2N with a score of 3. Now we're going into some sections where we've been very honest with all of you and transparent that we had about 7 areas that we were not able to map into the interRAI, but we are going to add them on. So for the skilled level of care for acute rehab, basically if they have that and they need that skilled intervention, it's going to be a yes or no question. So if it's marked yes, then the questions over in the right-hand side box will populate and you need to respond to each of those questions. If it's no, that they don't have that, then you just move on. You will not need to put NA or anything in those boxes. Skill level of care for injections, same kind of setup. It's going to be yes or no that they are requiring that skilled level of care. And again, if you mark yes, and the following questions on the right-hand side will populate for you to answer. And again, if it's a no, you do not put anything in the boxes. And I don't think the boxes will actually populate at that point. Then for the medical observation, due to the changing or unstable condition that requires more often than 30-day visits, and we're missing some slides here, so we'll make sure we get that updated to you somehow. But there are some questions that follow underneath this as well. It'll be yes or no, then some questions about what, identifying what that unstable condition is, and how frequent are they going to the doctors, what type of doctors, and so forth. Oh, okay, so we put it on the second screen. I'm sorry. So there's the questions that would come up on the medical observation. For seizure disorder, that again did not map over to the interRAI, but again, if they're having some kind of seizure activity that requires a skilled intervention, if you mark yes, then the questions below will populate for you to answer. For the solids and fluids for the intermediate level of care, again, if you mark yes, then these questions will populate up to make sure that that individual does qualify for those indicators. And then for the passive range of motion, again, we've identified the questions. There's 3 questions below that will populate if you mark yes that this individual does need the range of motion exercises. And then for the intermediate level of care, that with the, this one doesn't get used that often right now anyhow, but to remain consistent, this again will be a yes or no because it did not map over. But for those that require the monitoring of their health care plan with a nurse, then the questions would be to describe what the condition is and what is the impairment. Okay, and now I'm going to turn this over to Roxanne for Section O.
Amy, we're going to continue on. Section O looks at responsibility, and there's just one item here. It's looking at if the person has a legal guardian, and we want to determine if it's a court-appointed rep, this is someone who's legally responsible for the person that you are assessing. Have that information, you would just, of course, put yes, and then you can add that somewhere for future use. Section P looks at social supports, and for the first question here, we want to look at 2 key informal helpers, and this is to assess the person's informal caregiver support system. And when we're saying informal, it means that this is non-paid help. So it could be family, friends, neighbors, as long as no money exchanges, and then it's considered informal non-paid help. So P1 looks at 2 key informal helpers. And for this one here on A, to P1A, relationship to the person, these are people that your client views as the most helpful to them and can be relied on. So it can include spouse, family, friends, neighbors, and you really want to consider the quality of the relationship between your client and those people that they indicate as an informal helper. B looks at if this informal helper lives with the person. So you want to assess who does live with them and the duration of that living arrangement in the same space.
Roxanne, we have a question about what about volunteers? How is that captured here?
As long as they're not paid, they could be captured, but I don't know if there's actually a list for it. I'm just going to go back to that slide. I think if anyone doesn't ask me that question. Doesn't look like you can capture volunteers in this question. I'm pretty sure you might have it. Oh, I think it's in the formal section because it's a formal agency that would normally have the volunteers work for them. So it wouldn't be captured here. It would be captured under formal. Hope that's helpful to you. So moving on to IADL help C and ADL help B. With these ones here, we want to look at how if the helper helped with these areas. So ADLs are your personal hygiene, bathing, dressing, and IADLs would be transportation, making meals, ordinary housework. So we want to know if the helpers helped in those 2 areas.
Roxanne, we have another question. That what if there are more than 2 informal helpers, and how is that recorded?
Oftentimes, a lot of our clients would have notes in their software to capture any additional information that you can't capture in the assessment. Q2 looks at informal helper status. And this one here assesses the reserves of the informal caregiver support system. So with these questions, we're starting to look at potential caregiver stress. And this is very very important because, you know, if your caregivers are starting to become stressed with taking care of the person, then that has a lot of potential issues that will follow as a result. So they're very important to capture. A looks at informal helpers unable to continue in caring activities. B looks at primary informal helper expresses feelings of distress, anger, or depression. And C, family or close friends report feeling overwhelmed by the person's illness. So maybe they're having trouble handling it. They're feeling just, you know, quite overwhelmed. So they're going to need some intervention on your part to sort of mitigate that. E3 looks at hours of informal care and active monitoring during the last 3 days. And for this, we're looking at how much help overall your person has received by their informal support system. So it could be the primary and secondary helper and any others who've been helping with them. So you want to get a number in here in terms of hours. But with this one here, I've always found that this is a little bit challenging to code because you're really kind of sitting down with the person and the family members and saying, okay, what have you done to help this person over the last 3 days? I want to sort of get a sense of how much time you're putting in. And probably the best way to do this is to start with the ADLs and the IADLs, how much help have you been providing with that. If they are heavy care, a lot of service has been going in for this person. You know, you want to make sure that you capture any kind of sleep time that the informal caregivers have, because a lot of people will say, oh, you know, I monitor them 24 hours a day, which, if it's one person, would be very difficult to do. At some point, they're probably sleeping. So you want to just make sure you capture it as accurately as possible. And we have some, when you get your training, we have some job aids that will help you determine how to capture that information. P4 looks at strong and supportive relationship with family. And this looks at the people the person can rely on. So family members may be actively involved in the person's physical care and maintaining the household or helping the person make medical decisions. So that would be considered strong and supportive. Let's say yes or no for that question.
Okay, Roxanne, there's another question. Can you see that on your chat from Carol?
Yes, last 3 days.
Would you mind addressing that?
Accurate. Sure. Sometimes families staying with the person when they first get home from hospital, the plan to leave tomorrow and won't be there for the next 3 days. When you're doing any assessment with any interRAI instrument, you're looking at sort of 3 days prior to. So if you assess today, you're looking at today is day 3, and you're looking back a couple of days from there. You're not looking forward, you're looking previous. So hopefully that will capture what it is that we're trying to get in this question. Going forward, yes, it won't be accurate. It's not even capturing that piece. I hope that answered that question. Next section. Oh. So I'm reading your questions as they're coming up, so hopefully I can...
It sounds like they need more clarity on that.
Okay, so let me just reread it here. Seems that it would inflate the need. So yeah, so if you are assessing for the very first time, you may only get information on the day that you're assessing. You may not get it 2 days before for whatever reason. So you can only capture what you have. And it's as accurate as it's going to be with that information. If it's a client that you've had for a long time, of course, you're going to be able to get more information. If it's an initial assessment, you have to go with what you have. These assessments look at a point in time. Hopefully, 3 days is manageable. If it's not, if it's just the day that you're assessing them and the day before, then that's what you capture. You're looking at the future needs. Many of these questions contribute to apps which are clinical assessment protocols, and scales, which are scales sort of like, is the person depressed? Do they have problems with their cognition? So when you get that information, you can analyze it and you can start to plan how you're going to manage those issues going forward. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and then I'll look again at any questions that I might have missed. Section Q looks at environmental assessment here, and we have 4 items in this section. First one is home environment, and for this we want to determine if the home is hazardous or uninhabitable. And this may open up a discussion about a move to a more appropriate environment. It can also help determine the need for more formal care. That's what you're looking at here with this. Question 1A looks at disrepair of the home. So this is looking at inadequate or no lighting throughout the house, or holes in the floor, leaky pipes, those types of things. Question B looks at squalid condition, and this is extremely dirty. It may, you may have dry urine and feces and infestation. It's definitely more than usual clutter. C looks at inadequate heating or cooling. So it may be too hot in the summer, too cold in the winter, and maybe the person can't control the temperature. Those types of things you're looking at for this question. D looks at lack of personal safety. So this one here, be fear of violence or safety issues, visiting neighbors, maybe heavy traffic in the street. They find that is going to be an issue for them. The person may feel at risk of violence within or just outside of their home. It can be a real or perceived threat, as the person tells you. And the last one here, limited access home or rooms in the home. A person may have difficulty leaving or entering the home. Maybe they're unable to climb the stairs, or they have difficulty maneuvering in the home. If they live in an apartment building and there's a broken elevator and they can't get to and from their apartment easily, those are the types of things you're looking at here. We're still on section Q here, and for this one, Q2, does a person live in an apartment or house re-engineered accessible for persons with disabilities? This one here, we spoke to interRAI about because it really didn't give us much information. We didn't know if it was something that was, a true wheelchair accessible setting, or if it was as simple as putting up bars in the bathroom or maybe a ramp to get in and out of the house. And when we spoke to interRAI, they said it includes all of those things. So it could have been done, they could be moving into something already renovated, or they're in a place and it has even had minor things renovated to help make it a little bit more accessible for their disability. Q3 looks at the outside environment. And here we want to know if there's availability of emergency assistance, or maybe they have the alarm systems that they use. Is there access to a grocery store that they can get to without assistance, or availability of home delivery of groceries? So if something happened, could they get the help? Could they get food in or get out to get food? And Q4 looks at finances, and this really is looking at trade-offs. Somebody trade off something for something else. So you want to determine if limited funds prevented the person from receiving required medical or environmental support. Maybe somebody is a heavy smoker and they decided instead of buying their medication for that week, they were going to buy a carton of cigarettes. And that is their choice, absolutely. It's not for us to pass judgment on this. However, if they have done it, then we would record it here as yes. And then it would, probably be an opportunity to have a discussion about, how can we assist with this, or maybe we should think a little bit differently about your health and how you want to manage that. But of course, it depends on what the trade-off is, how you're going to address that.
Okay. this is Amy. I just wanted to interject on this because I want to address about the ACCM questions. Don't forget the ACCM and the level of service will be grayed out starting in July 5th for all of you because we have mapped all those tools into the interRAI. So that way it's going to reduce data entering for everybody. But as far as the section on environmental assessment, I just wanted to touch base on this and the fact that this will not replace our current RFA requirements, but this information will be eventually used in conjunction with the questions that are also in the person-centered monitoring tool, which we are currently mapping into the interRAI, so to alleviate, again, some duplications there. But we're hoping eventually from the person-centered monitoring tool and from the interRAI, excuse me, that we'll be able to bridge these questions to make it more meaningful, to get more meaningful data and for you to have more meaningful assessments. But pertaining back to the RFA, this section with the person-centered monitoring tool might lead into more of an RFA structure. But again, we're still kind of working that out. So just stay tuned. And if you have ideas about that, please fill those to me so we can take all that into consideration. Okay. Back to you, Roxanne.
Thank you. Section R here, and Amy, did you want to make any comments on this before I start?
I did. With Section R and Section S, the titles of these have discharge in them, and for the state of Indiana, as we all are aware, discharge is it's a term used for institution, and I know that this is under the radar for Debbie and I to talk to interRAI about, is there any possibility of changing that determination, because that's the language that we use for the home and community-based settings. So, but this Section R and Section S will be in line with our DEW process, but this will give us probably a little bit more detail to coexist with our DEW language on that. Thank you, Roxanne.
Welcome. Well, for Section R, we have 5 items in this section. First one here, one or more care goals have been met in the last 90 days. This identifies any of the person's treatment goals established by them or members of their care team, it being nurses, social workers, therapists, medical doctors, that have been achieved in the last 90 days. Now, when you're doing an initial assessment on a person, you may not have any of this information. You've just met them. You're looking at what happened 90 days before your assessment. They may not have any information to provide you, or you may not be able to determine that, and that's fine. If that's the case, then you would respond to no, one or more care goals have not been met in the last 90 days, and then just move on to the next question. This would probably be a much more meaningful question when you do your reassessment, because then you'll know whether or not in the last 3 months since you've seen them, if care goals have been met. R2 looks at overall self-sufficiency, if it's changed significantly, if as compared to 90 days ago. And again, this one may be difficult to gather that information on somebody who's initial. This includes self-care, performance and support, continence patterns, use of treatment. Again, you're going on what the person is telling you, and you can only gather what information that you have. So I wouldn't spend a huge amount of time on this and despair over it, particularly if you're just initially assessing this person. But if their self-sufficiency has improved over the last 3 months, or there haven't been any changes, then you would just go on to Section S. You would move on. But if they say that, yes, I am worse than I was 3 months ago, there has been some deterioration, then you move on to the next section.
Roxanne, there was a good question about Section R1, about giving some examples about the care goals in the community. Could you respond to that?
Sure. It could be, I think I mentioned it here. Oops, pardon me, on our. So it could be maybe they had some therapy that they were receiving. So their goal, maybe they had a hip replacement and their goal was to be able to walk and get strengthened. So it could be something like that. It could be something in terms of they had some counseling with a social worker. Maybe they had some grief counseling because somebody had passed away and they've gone through that and they've reached their goal. They're able to manage a little bit better. It could be some medications that they were taking to help with that depression, or other medications to help them with their physical and mental status. So any type of goals like that can definitely be included. So think about anything that they've worked on with nurses, social workers, therapists, or medical doctors. It's quite open.
And then, Roxanne, there's a question from Area 4 from Carol about Section Q. Would you mind taking a look at that and maybe responding to that as well?
Okay, so section, let's go back to that. So Section Q, re-engineered, that seems positive, but home environment and finances appear to be negative. I'm not sure, Carol, what it is that you're getting to here. I think I need a little bit more information to respond to that.
Okay. And then Laura had a question about going back to the medical-based care goals. Wondering, just clarifying if that was medically focused or if it's what type of care goals.
Medically-based care goals for outside environment and finances?
So maybe, Laura, if you could offer a little bit more information or detail about your question. It looks like Carol just, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe I'll just try and tackle the outside environment one and the finances in terms of the thoughts that it was a negative thing. And I think really with the whole environmental assessment, we just want to make sure that our clients are supposed to manage themselves and their care within their environment. You know, particularly for the outside environment one, we're trying to look at the future and if something should happen, how they're going to be able to be managed. I can give you an example of what's happened here. I'm in Toronto, and we have our home care agencies. They do their version of a interRAI assessment. And with information like this, if there's some type of emergency, I had a case manager who had an apartment building, and there was a fire in that apartment building, and they had several clients in that apartment building that they had information on. So they knew that with those clients, they were vulnerable and needed to have assistance because they couldn't get out, because they couldn't have, nobody could have access to getting services in unless it was that home care agency. And with the fire, it just made it even that worse. So it's just getting that information to see if something should go wrong, how can we help them? Are they able to get what they need? Can somebody help them get what they need? And if not, then it's something that we should follow up on and be prepared for the future. That's, I think, what they're trying to gather with this outside environment and trying to make sure that in an emergency can this be managed. And also with finances, this happens all the time. People will trade off. They just don't have enough money to get what it is they need. And if we know that going forward, then at least we have the opportunity to have that dialogue with them and say, okay, if this is the case, how can we manage this so that you get what it is you need? I hope that was helpful.
Laura did also provide more about, she just wanted some assurance that the interRAI care goal is not just taking the medical components into play, but also the non-medical components.
Or any particular question, because it does look at all. Absolutely. Even at the beginning of this assessment tool, it asks what the client goals are right from the beginning.
That's probably
definitely takes that into consideration.
And it's probably important to kind of make a note too that this tool, I mean, just because you do one section doesn't mean that because the tool is going to interject all sections and you're going to kind of build on each other, right? I mean, Roxanne, that's kind of like the point of the tool, to have more of a comprehensive and look at that person and their situation overall, just not from a medical standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, interRAI has been very good at broadening this because, quite frankly, it was very medically based, the earlier generations of these instruments. But this one that you have now does ask a lot of pointed questions directly to the client. What are your goals? What is it that we can help you with? And very pointed questions that only a client can answer. And you can't take into consideration everybody else who's taking care of them with those questions. So it's definitely medically based, but also it's client-focused, for sure. So we're just we're sort of doing an overview of certain sections, but please do keep in mind that this whole entire assessment is integrated, and parts that you see here are not in other areas, and other areas and questions you're asking that you don't see here are probably in other areas. I know I see a couple of questions here about will the client get a final score and what will the score mean. There's no final score. There are outputs. There are different scales that I mentioned, like a cognitive performance scale, depression scale, ADL, IADL. And there are a range of scores on each of those scales, so they will receive a score. And that just gives you an idea of where they stand. Are they having a lot of problems with their ADLs? Are they having problems with depression and cognition? And it's up to the assessor and the family and client to determine, do we want to do something about this? And we want to see improvement in these areas. So that helps you determine how to go forward with your planning. Also, we have CAPs, clinical assessment protocols, that relate to some of those scales. So there's a depression cap, a cognition cap, caps on ADLs and IADLs. That will give you lots of information on why it triggered, so why did this cap come up, and will give you some helpful information on how you can address it going forward, again, with your client and family. So there's lots of information that comes out of just completing this assessment that will be of use to you and your client going forward, but no final type of score. It's really just to explore the areas that this assessment is saying could be problematic. I want to see some of the other questions. I'm hoping I can answer for you.
It looks like Gary 7 had a question about that too, Roxanne, about
let's see. Okay.
It's like the third one.
How will we know? Is this the one? How will we know if and what one qualifies for when we're in the home with them? Are we going to have to leave, enter all this data, and then return to the client's home for care planning? Oh, I hope not. The idea with your software is that you should be able to access all of these outputs offline. So you would, if you don't have an internet connection, you should still be able to do it offline. So you would go in, do your assessment. Your software would be calculating all the results behind the scenes and be able to provide it to you. The best practice is to definitely do that in the home with the client and or the family so that you can plan right there. If you do have to go back or do it over the phone after you go to the office, it just kind of interrupts that therapeutic relationship that you've established with your client. So hopefully the software is designed for you to do that, and then you can get it all done at that time. There are some questions on actual coding, so how would you code this? And I would ask that we can leave that to when we actually go through the actual coding stuff. This is really an overview because we could I could go on forever. We only have so much time. But for specific coding questions, they will be addressed in your training going forward. And then we have some questions about laptops and the software. And Amy, I'm going to defer those to you. I can.
With the, I mean, it would be ideal for the laptop, but I understand, I think Marcia mentioned that too about, that could be a barrier in the home during the assessment, but that would be really up to you and your AAA and how you want to use the tool, if you want to use it on a laptop, or you should also be able to do a printable version of that to take with you as well. So, so that is going to be left up to your AAA or to your independent practices.
I'd like to make a comment on that with the laptop, that clients hate them. I've heard this question for many, many years. And quite frankly, I'm going to be very open with you. It's up to you as the assessor to make this a comfortable thing for your clients. When I went in, I did this myself. I was a case manager, and I was brand new doing this, and I had to bring in this laptop and try to make this work. What I found really helpful was to explain, of course, what it is, what this is all about, what it is I'm trying to do. It's going to take a little bit more time than maybe you're used to, but I will get a lot of great information coming out of this that we can use going forward to put a plan of care together for you. I would have the person sit beside me as I'm entering the information, and then I would show them the results after it came out. If you choose to have the person across from you when you have the laptop going, that can physically and mentally present as a barrier. So what I would do is have my interview, ask a bunch of questions, and then I would say, can I take a couple minutes out and just enter this in the computer? And then I would put the laptop down and then ask more questions so that it was much more comfortable instead of it being more clinical, like this thing in front of you. So there's definitely ways that you can incorporate a laptop in your interview, and as an assessor, it's your responsibility to do that. It's going to be tough in the beginning, particularly if you feel that this is a difficult thing for you to do, but it definitely can be managed. As I said, this has been going on for many years, and I haven't heard of too many people being really upset about it. But having said that, if you do have, if you're going to be assessing people with mental health issues who have some paranoia, it could be a big barrier and you may not be able to use it. But I think most people are going to be okay with it as long as you introduce it in a way that's acceptable to them, that makes sure that you're paying attention to them and not what you're typing into the computer, because as soon as you do that, you've lost them, and it will be a barrier. We're going to continue on. I know there's a lot of questions about laptops, but we'll certainly address those at a later time. I think we had ended up here on Section R. And let's see. So actually, let me just go back here so that we can refresh ourselves here. We went to Section R2, and for this one here, it looked at overall self-sufficiency has changed as compared to 90 days ago. And if it has gotten worse, so the client is worse than they were today, 90 days ago, then you move on to the next part of this question. And for this one here, what needs to be captured is the number of ADLs in which the person was independent prior to deteriorating. So they were doing okay, but they started to go downhill. And when we're looking at the ADLs, we're looking at the same ADLs that we're capturing in Section G: bed mobility, hygiene, dressing upper body, dressing lower body. So it's important to go through all of those and say, are you worse now than you were 90 days ago in this area? And then you look at the IADL items. So that's the meal prep and transportation and shopping, those things. Are you worse than you were 90 days ago? And you just really just count up how many of the ADLs and IADLs we do have job aids that will help you with this to help you sort of guide your conversation with your client. And then the third one looks at the time of onset of the event or problem related to the deterioration. So sometimes there is definitely an event that happened. You know what, I broke my hip, and when I broke my hip, I got worse. But sometimes they may not know what it was. They can't describe it, they don't know, it just sort of happened, and that's fine. You can code for that. There's no clear precipitating event. So again, it's just something that you're going to have to take a little bit of time to try and gather. Sometimes you won't have that information, and that's fine. Just move on and you just go to the next question and code it as best as you can. Section F. So Amy, I think you have a couple of comments you want to make here.
Again, just to reiterate about the word discharge, again, we're trying to work with interRAI to see if we can change that to be in line with our home and community-based language of termination, which again, this section will be in line with our termination or DEW procedures.
Okay, perfect. Well, this is the last section, just 2 items here. It looks like the last day of stay. That would be your termination date. And then where that person went after the termination. So this list here in Section 2 is the same list that you'll get in Section A, with one addition, number 15, deceased, so you can capture that here. Depends on your business process whether or not you're going to complete this section here in the assessment tool. Many people don't because they have another place to capture that other than in the assessment tool. So it could look different depending on your agency and how you decide to go forward with it. The last day of stay probably would be populated by your software, but if not, you can certainly add that in, and then you choose where they went after discharge.
Oh, Roxanne, there was a question about what if they moved out of state? Then how would that, where would that fit in?
Other.
Okay.
For 14.
So then, Laura, to supplement to that response, that you would mark other on the interRAI, but in the DEW activity, then it would be coded more specifically to out of state.
Somebody had a question of the 10 ADL areas and the 8 IADL areas and where they're listed. If you go to section G1 and G2 in this assessment tool, all of them are listed there. And as I also mentioned, when you have your training, you'll have .age cheat sheets to help you determine what those are and how to address that with your client. Last one, I forgot we had one more. Section T, assessment information. This is basically your signature. Again, this is probably done electronically through your software. And then the date that you sign it as complete, again, likely done through your software. Was there anything else, Amy, that you would like for me to address here?
No, I think you responded well to the section T. Did anyone have any questions about this section?
I think there's one question that Area 7 had, and I think I wanted just speak to that a little bit. I'm feeling frustrated, a lot of kinks, the training, confusing, and you're absolutely right about all of this. When something is new, of course, there's all these unknowns and a lot of things to work out. And I think, the webinars have been helpful in just sort of giving you an overview. This is not the last of things to come. Debbie had mentioned that in the beginning. It will definitely become more clear as we go forward. This is not complete training by any means in regards to this whole assessment instrument. I will be doing your training in August, and definitely we'll get much more specific for all of the questions, because I know you have a lot of questions around them and how you should gather this information and how you should engage your client when you're doing this. So that will definitely be addressed. Keep you high and dry there. And I know that there's a lot of stuff going on in terms of the software, in terms of the laptop, and that will definitely be, more information will come on that as well. It's just trying to herd a lot of cats together all at once, and sometimes they get loose and we need to bring them back in. But definitely it'll be much more clear as we go on, so please don't despair. Well, maybe, Amy, we can complete the rest of this, and then I know there are some answers about the training going forward we can definitely address.
Hi everybody, this is Debbie, and I just came back in the room, so I'm seeing a few of these questions that are coming up and concerns about the training and the rollout. And I just want to reiterate, this is a major change, and we recognize that. And the truth is, no one will ever be ready for this. If we wait until everyone is perfectly comfortable and confident with this, we'd never do it. And sometimes that's why it's hard to make big leaps and big changes like this. And so we're really committed to diving into it, but we're diving into it with you. And we're all learning and trying to make this work together. And I think, Roxanne can maybe support me in this, or maybe she'll tell me I'm all wet. But as we've talked about the proper training method for interRAI, there's a big piece of it that relies upon the assessor, the rater who's doing the assessment, using the tool. And so there's training that happens, and then you go out in the field and you use the tool, and you come back and you get more training, and then you go out and you use the tool some more, and then you get more training. And we couldn't do that in the kind of small groups, person to person, because of the doing the whole state and having so many people using the tool, that we've tried to do that in a webinar format, and we've tried to create a rollout that will make use of that and give you all a chance to start using the tool. And I'm seeing a question right now, and frankly, some of these disturb me a little bit, that we don't all have a very positive attitude about this. And naturally, we don't want to hurt the consumers in this process, and there's absolutely no reason that they would be hurt by this unless the rater's negative attitude about the tool and the assessment gets transferred to the job and the conversation that you're having with the participant. And that's what we want to be careful about. There's no reason for them to even know that you're using a different assessment tool than you've used in the past. You can have conversations with them that are positive in nature and talk about the commitment of the state and your case management entity to appropriately assessing their needs, to engaging them in a person-centered planning process, to being sure that they are having a voice in the process, and that you're getting an accurate assessment of what their needs are so that you can match their services to it. We have to message this correctly, and if we haven't done a good job of messaging that to you all, then we apologize for that, and we'll try to do a better job of that in the next few weeks. And I'm going to get more directly involved in this to be sure that we have good messaging going out. But it's really critical that all of you that are in the field, kind of face-to-face with consumers in this process, don't drag, even if you're unhappy with this change for whatever reason, don't drag them into it. Don't let it have a negative effect on them, because it doesn't have to. It doesn't directly impact their services at this point or anything like that. Our level of care definition stays the same as it's always been. We're using a new assessment tool. That's in the end going to make things better for everyone, and there's going to be growing pains, and we're going to sort through it. That's not for the consumer to know or see or feel anything about. you know, we need to work that out kind of internally amongst ourselves. So please keep that in mind, and let's all kind of try to work together with it. And it's fine to let us know your frustrations so that we can help address those and tweak our trainings where we need to, do more trainings in certain areas. That's great. We're all for that, and we want to hear that kind of feedback, but we really want to hear it in a positive and constructive way so that it makes us all collectively better. And we certainly don't want consumers to be victims of that in any way, and there's just no reason that they should be. So hopefully we can all kind of pull together with that. We've got a slide up now that we used early on, I think maybe in the first webinar, that just talked about, you know, why we're using the interRAI in the first place. And these are kind of the core things that the interRAI helps us to do. It's helping us ensure that we have a home and community-based setting, that we have integration into the community to the highest degree we possibly can, that we're maximizing the individual's functional capacity. Again, being person-centered, emphasizing their strengths where we can, either their strengths to perform ADLs and activities on their own, or their strengths in terms of their informal supports and their own resources and how we're utilizing those. That we're doing a better job of addressing health problems. You know, we're not doing that well where we integrate our case management on the social services side with health outcomes. I'm not saying that to like scare everybody that you're responsible for the complete health outcomes of your folks. We know you have limited spheres of influence, but we also know that there's untapped potential for us to start getting more integrated with the healthcare community. And, you know, some areas have started to do that already with care transition projects. We have a new medical director on staff with the Division of Aging, Dr. Stephen Council, who has piloted the GRACE, not piloted, he created the GRACE care transition model. And he's helping us to start to explore how we can interact with the health community. But one way we do that is by using a more evidence-based clinical assessment tool like the interRAI. So that's one of the reasons we've done this. The accuracy level, quality-driven health and social outcomes. You know, we've talked about how this tool will minimize the narrative that you have to provide. And in doing that, it gives us data that we can work with better and use even in comparison with nursing facility data. That's important because it means we can start to analyze nursing facility data and identify individuals who are in nursing facilities who have the same kind of functional capacity characteristics as the people we're serving in the community. That means that they're targets for transition. They're potential MFP or other transition people that could come back out into the community if we can identify them and get them in touch with all of you, with the ADRCs, and make that transition home. So that's just kind of coming back to what we summarized, you know, 6 weeks ago now or so when we first started, maybe 2 months ago now, when we first started all of this. So we just wanted to kind of circle back to that as we close out this series of webinars on these sections. If you want to go ahead to the next slide, I think it's a summary of, again, the differences between the eScreen and the interRAI and what we're trying to highlight here. And again, you've all seen this before, but the problems that we've had with the eScreen is that it's so subjective, it's so focused on eligibility, it's very dependent on that detailed, lengthy narrative. And we're not by any stretch of the imagination saying you won't have narrative in the future with the interRAI. There'll always be a place for that. You've got to communicate what you're seeing and hearing and observing to us. But the nature of the narrative will get so much shorter, so much briefer. You'll have ways of recording the same information without all the words around it. The eScreen has lacked clear definitions. The interRAI will give us a chance to get to that point. The manual is very specific. We haven't been able to use the manual as interactively as we would like to yet, but it's coming. we had contracts and things that had to get into place with that. And honestly, we are trying to do this in a kind of a systemic way here and not overburden you with information from the outset. We're trying to give you what you need to know to get started and then start laying on more detailed and developed information as we move towards that point 6 months or so from now, where we'll be really into what the greatest benefits of the interRAI are around the clinical assessment protocols and the risk assessments. So that's, I think I hit most of those things there. It's going to allow us to get rid of most of the ACCM and the level of service assessments, so we all get kind of combined into one interRAI location, one assessment tool. And we move into a world of using an evidence-based tool. And some of you have probably heard, the word evidence-based a lot in your agencies, particularly around some of the Older Americans Act programs and Title III-D stuff. Understanding that there's value in having a tool or a system that has been tested and is evidence-based for this. And so we're recognizing there's a benefit to us on a lot of fronts to move away from our homegrown tools of the past and into truly tested tools. So again, just kind of giving you a reminder of where we started with all this, why we're doing this. It's not to torture you. It really isn't. We believe this is a big step forward for Indiana, and it's coming at the time when we're making a lot of other changes with PASSAR and other things, and a new software coming here in 9 months or so at most. But these things are all interconnected to each other, and it makes sense to do them all at the same time. So hopefully that just kind of brings us back and centers us again to why we're doing this. And I think the next slide starts to outline some of the next steps and maybe answers some of these questions that are popping up now about super users. So webinars are going to become our friends one way or another. We're going to overcome some of our technology challenges on this end so that we get better at these things. But it's the most effective way for us to reach the largest audience of all of you. So we're in on webinars. We're going to keep them going. So we'll have a more detailed schedule for you over the next few weeks. We will be adding one webinar here in the next couple weeks before July 1st, just to kind of do a big summary of the interRAI. It'll be repetitive. We'll hit on some of the frequently asked questions that we've seen in each of the sessions. We'll go back and hit some of the sections of the tool that are most critical. We'll talk more about our plan going forward, and then just open it up to lots of Q&A so that we can try to address as many concerns as we can. We've received some really great questions from some of you that have spent a lot of time really studying this tool, and some of you even have had the manual and you've studied the manual, and we so appreciate the very constructive and helpful questions that people have asked. Some we can answer, and some it's going to take us a little time to answer, but it was good to get those questions and have people be so thoughtful. And those folks had just taken the initiative to go on the interRAI website and buy the manual themselves. We're actually working to get manuals purchased and get those out to all of you, but it will take us a little while longer. As you know, we are at the, or maybe you don't know, but most of you probably have the same issues. We're at the end of the fiscal year, and that creates some challenges for getting purchase orders done, but we'll have those coming shortly. Super user training then is scheduled, and Roxanne's going to be helping us with that. This is a train the trainer system, and so it's not for all case managers. There are super users that have been identified throughout the state. So those individuals know who they are, or their supervisors will be telling them shortly. We have their names, and that'll be the last week of August, and that's some very intensive training, and we think it'll come at a good time when you all have had a couple months to really be absorbed in the tool. We'll have done more webinars between now and then to keep reinforcing things. And then also in August, we're going to start some trainings through the Lewin group, who's providing some technical assistance for us to do some person-centered trainings. And those will be happening every month, August through December. There will be certain numbers of case managers that can participate each month. We don't know yet how we're going to select those, so we'll be working with all the ADRCs in particular to kind of set up a schedule and how we're going to do that and select participants. Sometimes we'll be able to have large groups, and other times they will be smaller groups of 35 or 40 people at a time. So we won't get everybody trained August through December, but we'll get a good jump on it, and then we'll set up more trainings for the next year. As part of that process, we'll be doing some master trainers that can continue that training effort. Some of those will be state staff, and some of you will have an opportunity to apply to be one of those master trainers that gets trained this year, and we'll have more information in the next couple of weeks about the application process for that. Then also in November and December is when we'll start doing the training on the clinical assessment protocols that go along with the interRAI, and Roxanne will be helping us with that as well. And that will be, we're waiting till then to do that because we're not going to implement that piece of the interRAI until we're fully moved into CAMS. And that is still scheduled to be the first quarter of 2017. We don't have anything more exact than that yet. So we didn't want to do the CAPS training too far ahead of when you'll actually be moving into CAMS and seeing that system. So that means that CAMS training will also start around January, maybe December even, as we get ready to move into that system. We're hoping here in the next month or so, I would say late July at this point, you'll start to get a chance, some of you at least will see demos of some of the CAMS system. Some of it's already been developed, and we see demos and updates every week. So it really is happening, always a little slower than we would like, but it's moving along and the system's coming together. So I think that, and as we do all of those trainings, they're all going to touch on interRAI somehow. Even when we talk about the person-centeredness piece, we'll be drawing it back to interRAI and how interRAI helps us to be person-centered. So everything is all very interrelated as we go along here, and it's all part of a bigger comprehensive program to move us, farther along as a group by a year from now. Even when we start the CAMS training, there will be pieces of that it's very person-centered in nature, and changes we've made to processes in CAMS to reflect person-centeredness and how we incorporate the interRAI and the CAPS and all of that. These things all will start to come together and to fall into place. But, it's going to be a tough year with a lot of training and learning and a lot of change coming. And we know we've got some folks out there that are very excited about that. And we're glad to see that. But we also recognize there's apprehension about it too. And we just ask you, hang with us, stay committed to this, communicate with us in constructive ways to let us know where you feel there's some gaps, and we'll keep adjusting and adding to our training curriculum. We'll get things posted online. I think we need to do some organizing with our online library, if you will, to be sure things are really easy to find and accessible, and we'll work with the tech folks here on that end. All this technology is a little new to the folks here, so we're struggling with IT issues, of course, but everybody's getting better at it, and we'll figure out a good system. I don't have on this slide the other big thing that will happen the end of July is Roxanne's company Relias has an online training and certification tool for the use of the interRAI, and they're working now to modify it to include our additional questions, and that will be ready the end of July, and so you'll also get a chance to start doing the self-paced online training program as we go along here too. So what's our time here?
We have 12:30, so. Okay.
So we have some time to go back and see if there are questions that we want to take here. So here's a question about, we are used to knowing who exactly qualifies for waiver choice, et cetera, and who does not. As I look at this tool, I can't figure out how we know which program a person would be eligible, and that's going to be very important starting in July. This is where, and you're probably not from one of the pilot agencies, because I think the pilot agencies would, the choice pilot agencies might understand the significance of this question. Sorry, Carol, I don't know where you're from. I didn't think so. Good. Not good, but I think it explains some of the difference in approach here. What we've seen with the choice pilot is we've tried to make the shift to a needs-based, person-centered assessment that isn't focused on eligibility out of the gate. It really is focused on looking at the needs of the individual and figuring out how to address those, and figuring out the payer source is sort of the last step of the process. It's not where we want to start. And I do recognize, I'm not crazy, I recognize that there are times when you have to know who has to pay for what. And your executive directors and fiscal people need to know who's going to pay your salary, for instance, where that fits in there. And so there are eligibility determinations that have to get made, but they don't necessarily have to get made while you're sitting there talking to the person and collecting that assessment information. We want you to not have to be so focused on that in the beginning, so that you can focus on just assessing and figuring out what the needs are and how best to meet them. And the choice pilot starts with, let's not jump to programs that are going to fill that need. Let's look at, what are your informal supports already doing? Do you have financial resources that you can use if you knew what to use them on? Are there community resources and supports that could help satisfy your need? Rather than jumping to, what happens when we jump to eligibility is the next step is, let's pull out the menu of services that are available, and what would you like from the menu today? and that's where I think we get service plans that balloon a little bit and are not person-centered and are not needs-based, because they're more about selecting items from the menu of what I'm eligible for. And so what we've seen in the choice pilot, and what we're trying to kind of take out of that pilot and bring to everybody through the person-centered and assessment process is, let's not start the conversation there. And I see, Carol, you've got a follow-up question there with the annuals and the 6 months to see if they still qualify. That's kind of a different area, and certainly on those 6 months evaluations, what we're going to have you do is do the short form interRAI assessment. We have a short version of it that picks out exactly what questions apply to eligibility, so that you can do it in much less time, and it really is kind of just verifying eligibility. You're not doing a service plan from that. Now at the annual, we're still going to ask you to look at the whole tool, because you are doing a service plan at the annual, and you do need to think about, have the needs changed. Roxanne, I don't know if you can speak to the average time that it takes to complete the assessment.
I can. It is a good question. When you're first doing this assessment, and I can say this because I've been down this road as well, it could take you about an hour and a half. And the reason it could take you that long when you're first doing it is because it's a new assessment for you, so you want to make sure you have all the information, so it just slows you down. Can depend on the person you're talking to. If they're very chatty, that can add to the time. And also to the technology, because you're not only just doing a new assessment, but you're capturing it on a laptop, so it does take a little bit of coordination. So it can take a little bit of time to do this. Once you've done a handful of these, it just gets easier and it just gets faster. So just plan to spend at least an hour and a half on your first assessments, and then you will get better. I promise you. I did.
And thanks, Roxanne. And I would venture to, I guess, to say that is kind of typical time for a good comprehensive completion of our current eScreen tool. It's not that much different with an initial I don't know anything about you kind of start from beginning assessment process. So, you know, we've thought all along that this will not necessarily be a lot of additional time. What it will do is make the time you spend the most value added it can possibly be, that you really are spending more of your time in communication with the person than you are filling out a lot of narrative and other forms and documentation. So yeah, and short form may be an area we will emphasize in a future webinar, so you can understand, you know, how we selected those items. And yes, Anne, it's the same short form that hospital discharge planners will use for nursing facility level of care for a person entering a nursing facility. So it's just a subset of the interRAI questions, and it's just those key ones that speak to eligibility. I know there was some questions earlier on, kind of IT-related questions for people who have laptops and all of that. We'll have some more information coming from Rowing shortly on that, but the interRAI is being created in a web application, and so you're going to have internet to get to it for sure. It will interact with Insight so that you can click out of Insight and into the interRAI tool without a separate logon. So it's pretty seamless. We've seen the mock-ups and demos of it. It looks pretty cool and pretty easy to click through at this point. So let me see what other questions we have here. Sorry, give us just a second to read. No internet means a lot. Possibly, it depends. We certainly have a lot of areas of the state that still don't have good wireless internet connectivity available to you. So even if you have a card or something for your laptop, you might not be able to get to it. But we are working to try to come up with a fillable PDF of the interRAI. I don't know if we can do that yet. It is a licensed tool, and so we have some limits and have to work with the interRAI folks on exactly how we can access those things. But we're working on piecing that together and making it as usable as possible for you. But I wouldn't necessarily expect that you're going to want to be sitting, even if you could get it on your laptop, that you're going to be sitting there talking to a person and putting the stuff in the laptop at the same time. You know, we've all been in the field before too, and we know that the laptop can be an intimidating factor with people as you're talking to them, and it really should be more about the conversation. And you know, you can still have that piece of paper there and making your notes and jotting things down. So
another question about ADRCs and options counseling about the initials and phone calls.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the same as with the e-screen today, there's some information you collect that contributes to that from a phone call, and then you finish it off with your face-to-face assessment. I think that's still true with the interRAI. There are things you could start to fill in and then finish off when you see them face-to-face. It kind of just depends on the flow. I would say it's more like there's things you're going to maybe capture from the phone call that then you need to validate and explore further when you see them. But yeah, phone assessment has always been kind of part of the process. It's part of how you screen whether you really need to see an initial referral. So I don't think that's going to change all that much. The nature of your phone call isn't going to change all that much. There's some new information you need to collect. But I'd venture a guess to say, you know, even some of the new things in the interRAI that haven't been part of our old e-screen are things that most of you know about your clients or the individuals you serve. Client is not a good person-centered term. I'm trying not to use that anymore. The individual you serve. And I think most of you, you know that stuff about people. If somebody asked you about them, you could give them the answer. We're just giving you a place to record it, so you kind of get credit for knowing it. And now we know it, and it can help shape their service plan better, and it's data that we can report on. So don't be too scared by the volume of information that's here, because when you start adding up everything you know, and everything you're recording right now in multiple assessments, from the e-screen to your assisted living level of service assessment to the ACCM, you know, you're capturing lots of stuff in different places right now that we're trying to get all in one spot for you. Yeah, and I see Carol kind of validating there that an initial usually takes about an hour and a half now. So we're not looking at a huge shift in the amount of time. We're hopefully just making that better quality time that you're spending with that person. Let's see, there's another laptop question there somewhere, maybe.
Who was the start and stop date? Did you already address that one?
Yeah, there was a question about start and stop date entering here, and if you could do some follow-up on that question, that would help. We're not understanding that one.
I already answered Robin's.
So, yeah, I don't have a whole lot more details on the laptops yet and how that will work, but and it varies too, because some of you use laptops and you're using something like Citrix to still live connect into your database. Others are truly remote users with still import and export. So everybody's situation is unique on that, and we'll try to make sure that the help documents from Rowing kind of address all those different scenarios.
Marcia's a yes.
Yeah, Marcia, yes, that's definitely a yes. You can just answer.
You're hogging it.
You can pend and save the interRAI much like you do the e-screen, and then there's kind of that finalize button when you're done and it's complete. So yes, you can do it in segments if you need to. Okay. I think we have hit most of the questions. We'll, of course, review the chat as to see if we've missed anything, and we're still kind of compiling a list of FAQs, and we'll use those to shape some of the topics we hit in our final pre-7-1 webinar, and we'll get that date out to you as soon as we can. We need to my schedule is a little tight these last couple weeks. We obviously have a lot of webinars going on around PASSAR, and that's, you know, high priority too. So, but we'll get it scheduled probably before the end of the week here anyway, so that you'll know. And yeah. And then we'll have, again, the online training will come about the end of July, and I think you're really going to like that too. That Relias has a really nice system for that, and so we're excited to get folks access to that and have them start using it as well. So again, thank you all for participating, and this kind of closes out this first series of diving through each section of the interRAI. But it's just the beginning, so get ready for lots of fun webinar time with all of us. Thanks. Have a great day.